I'm Anne-Marie McCardle. Welcome to the Wave Breathwork Podcast, where we explore breathwork, how to support your nervous system, and readily available ways to work with your energy and physiology for meaningful change. So today's guest sits at the intersection of hard science and human potential. I'm honoured to welcome Martin McPhilimey. He's a leading voice in breath science, respiratory physiology, and sleep research, bridging science with embodied practice. Martin is an exercise physiologist specialising in respiratory physiology and sleep scientist, bringing over 15 years of academic, clinical, and applied experience to the conversation. And he's also the founder of the School of Breath Science, an international training school that's dedicated to raising the standard of breathwork education by combining research with practical applications. So I'm really excited for this conversation today. Let's dive in. So welcome, Absolutely. Martin. So happy that you are here. I mean, for me, this is like such a joy to get a chance to like geek out, but also for people to really learn from your brain, because I have learned so much from you just following you just online, and then obviously delving deeper into the service you provide for everybody through the School of Breath Science. So I'd love for everybody to get like an overview just of really everything that you do. And if you don't mind, if we could bring it right back to starting with your actual birth story, because this is actually how I came to like be aware of you. I read you described online one day your birth story, and I thought this is such a fantastic example of Dharma and living your Dharma. So if you don't mind, like actually starting right from when you arrived.
Yeah, I think I'd like to first of all explain why that question or that comes up quite often, because I don't just go, oh, I was born like this way, so therefore that's why I'm doing. But the reason that I got into respiratory physiology is because I studied sports science at university, and I really enjoyed exercise physiology. And we had two exercise physiologists who were professors in respiratory, so they were specialists in that area, and all their research was around inspiratory muscle training and how to improve the diaphragm function, to improve recovery and exercise performance and asthma and stuff like that. And I remember in the lab we were assessing how strong the diaphragm was and the inspiratory muscles were, and my results were just like twice as strong as anyone else in the lab. And so I always tell that story, and that's what made me get into respiratory physiology, because I was like good at it. They invited me into a lab to then assess me more, and I smashed all these tests. And so obviously that piqued my interest. And then I ended up doing a master's of research in the area. But everyone always asks the question, why do you think that why were you so much better than everyone else? And I'm like, I can never answer it fully. Obviously, it's always speculative. One of them is, at the time, I was doing a lot of heavy squats, a lot of powerlifting, and the thoracic kind of pressure, I think, could also improve, obviously, your diaphragm strength. But then you would also see a lot of powerlifters kind of like getting that as well, and I'm not sure they do. But the other thing is the fact that when I was born, I nearly died at birth because my cord was stuck around my neck, and I was completely blue when I come out, and I was really struggling with my breathing to get them to get me to breathe, and they had to quickly kind of like snip it and do an emergency quick to try and save me there, and it worked. But I always wonder whether there was a super compensation for that physiologically moving forward throughout life. It's like you've been born, you've had this super stressor come on, now your body's like, right, we're going to adapt to this. So you have like that adaptation process. And so when you then think about it, it's like I was born with issues to do with breathing, and that's now my life.
Yeah,
it's what I do for a living. So there is you could say a dharma there for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, and for me, like I came into breathwork because of recurrent collapsed lungs. It wasn't like I was like, let's be a breathwork coach, I want to do this. It was like a total learning pathway of like, I experienced this and then I learned this, and from here everything expanded. And that's why whenever I read your story, I was like, that is just it's so interesting, because I think you said your breath hold, I was listening to you on another podcast, you were like saying when you were free diving, your first breath hold was like, it was ridiculously long, right? It was like,
yeah, my breath hold, the first time I ever tried a maximum breath hold, I managed to get 3.5 minutes.
Yeah, for a first time, that's like, it's pretty good. Like,
yeah. And so, we've been doing some breath hold training today and some assessments, and most people are getting to like 60 seconds, 70 seconds, 75 seconds. Yeah. Right. Now, there was an element of me knowing that I was safe because I understood the physiology, and I understood like if I just keep holding my breath, all that will happen to me is I'll pass out. So I could just endure it, I guess, more from an intellectual level, knowing that it's not going to do any harm. But still, my lung function in terms of the size of my lungs, my vital capacity, how much air I can shift through my airways is 140% of what my range of height, age, and gender would be. And so there is a natural tendency to have larger lungs and stronger diaphragm. Yeah. and potentially maybe an air hunger tolerance that's higher than the average just from potentially from birth.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And I really do want to dive into this for listeners today around air hunger, around the language around CO2 tolerance, and around what that also can be used for in a beneficial way for people in titration and things like this. But before we just dive into that, just give a little bit more, if you don't mind, background of sort of your clinical experience and then what you sort of seen through that led you on this path. So you would have been working obviously in the healthcare system in the NHS before you moved to Australia. So just giving everybody a little bit more of a background there on what you
Absolutely. So once I finished my Masters of Research in exercise physiology, I wanted to get into sports science, but I also wanted a more stable career and not have to go and volunteer in a club for a couple of years before you start getting paid, because that's how it was then. I don't know if it is now. And so I actually ended up it was in a second cohort in the UK where they just built a new national training program where they were trying to pull out prospects from academia into become clinical scientists, because all the old physiologists were retiring and no one was coming through to be physiologists in the academic space, but also in the clinical space. And so the UK still do it now. They basically have a national-wide program where they get applicants to come in and let's say, like, we've got specific areas, cardiac, respiratory, sleep, pathology, across the board, and then try to get the best of the best to then come into the hospitals and train. And so I did a 3-year training program, which was like a paid training program, which was absolutely incredible. I literally had competencies it was a competencies-based training and a practical-based training and then another academic space. But I could have freedom because I was a part of a team, but I was an additional member of the team. So my hours didn't really count towards their requirements. So whatever I wanted to do in the hospital, if I could make a justification that it would serve my understanding, I could go away and do it.
Brilliant.
And so I saw lung transplants, I saw bypasses in the heart, open surgery, I saw amputations of legs, crazy things, just because I was kind of there, like, why not? And so then that became like a 3-year training program where I then qualified as a clinical respiratory and sleep scientist. And I had always wanted to live in Australia ever since I was 16 years old. And so I remember getting towards my end of my exams. All I had was my practical exams left. And I was looking on seek.com.au to see whether there's a job in Australia. And I typed in respiratory and there was a job going in Perth, Western Australia for a clinical respiratory and sleep scientist. And I'm like, well, I'm just about to qualify for that. And so I'll apply. And so, I ended up applying, didn't tell my parents at all, and then got the job, a couple of interviews, got sponsored, finished my role in Nottingham, moved to London for about 6 months, worked in St Bart's Hospital, and was basically their cardiopulmonary exercise specialist in the cardiology department. That was basically working with people with lots of heart issues and then reporting to the doctors to say what I think's going on. I then moved to Australia, and it was a very, very different experience. I was working in 2 of the largest hospitals in the UK, a lot of research funding, a lot of very sick patients, to then a small little private clinic in Western Australia, in Perth, the most isolated city in the world, to having like 3-4 patients a day with very simple equipment, with no research. And so I'd made a bit of a poor career choice as a scientist, but best choice in terms of the life decision. Now, the type of people I was working with changed from very, very sick people, putting people on ventilators, being at death's door, to people who were concerned and worried and breathless and kind of like anxious and stressed. And you could see the doctors were like, normal results, go and see a GP. And they were kind of like going nowhere. And it was quite clear to me that they needed more support to understand how to breathe, how to sleep better behaviorally, and how to manage stress. And so Performance Through Health, I believe you've been following me since Performance Through Health. Yeah. And so that was my first consultancy, really. And the goal was there, it's like, I'm seeing so many people get to the age of 50 and no longer be able to follow their life dreams because now they're burnt out, they've got chronic disease, they've got heart problems and extra. I'm like, well, if you put your health first, and particularly the pillars were sleep, nervous system regulation and breathing, maybe we can reduce chronic stress, we can reduce, disease, and you can live for longer and work for longer. And so that was the consultancy that I kind of built initially. And then 2021, when COVID hit, I realized I was burnt out. I didn't enjoy my job anymore. And there was an opportunity online where people were wanting what I was offering more. So I decided to quit my clinical career, travel the world, built an online business. And then as a result of, I guess, putting very high level science out on Instagram, which not many people do, a lot of people started following me for that. And eventually that led to people asking me to mentor. Eventually that made me to design the breath science certification. That led very rapidly to getting a lot of people. And that came to the concept of now I need a community to hold space for continual professional development. And the idea of the school came. So now I have a school of breath science and I'm teaching high level, you could say academic level breathing science and nervous system and sleep stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's tremendous.
Raise the standard of our, the standard of the practitioners that are in our breathwork space, but just also trying to pull clinicians to understand how much we can use these tools to help people to empower themselves to heal themselves without needing to go, obviously I'm not saying everyone needs medication, but medication doesn't need to be first in a lot of issues.
Yes, absolutely. And I think you connect the dots through a lot of things, like even just what you're describing there in your pathway of like within the healthcare system. I'm going to speak to NHS because that's what I'm experiencing. That's what I'm living with. There's a lot of blocks to time, as you've got these wonderful people working in the field, absolutely, but they're working within this system that doesn't give the time. And say even an example of where I was having recurrent pneumothorax, not once did anybody say, let's look at how you're breathing. Like, do you know, literally as in let me just watch you breathe. That did not occur. That happened through pranayama classes and kundalini and all these different things. When I was like, oh, that was what was wrong. It was like just really not paying attention to the stress loading in my body. So I'd love for people to kind of learn, if we just break it down a little bit between sleep and breath and some of the more common things that you see that people maybe just don't connect into why they're not. I'm going to go as far as saying maybe living their most authentic life because you're so distracted perhaps by the load of stress in your system and things like this. So in whatever kind of order you would like to talk about it, I mean, I would say sleep is a great place to start because obviously if you're not sleeping good, So what is the most common issues you see for people with sleep? Like talk about snoring and the warning signs. I used to, for example, wake up often with an apnea. Now I don't have sleep apnea, but I used to wake up with the, oh my God, what's happening? And this like holding my breath. And if I had paid attention to that, I didn't pay attention. I was like, in my late 20s thinking that happens to everybody. That's totally fine, and not paying attention. Now that doesn't happen to me at all anymore. I sleep like a baby. So maybe just like going into a little bit more detail around some of the warning signs that people can dial into where they might want to pay a little bit more attention to their sleep.
Yeah, so for me, the most important thing with sleep is regular sleep-wake times, and not fixed as in like you have to go to bed at the exact same time, but a window, but trying to keep that window within 30 to 45 minutes either side. Because really, one of the crucial things that we've learned over the last 10 years is that the brain's a massive prediction machine, and it's releasing, different chemicals, whether they are adrenaline or whether that's cortisol, whether that's melatonin, those things are all on a predictive pattern. And so if our behavior is not predictable, our brain can't predict, and therefore we don't get the synchronization of rising cortisol that's meant to make you feel alert. And that comes down at night time, and then melatonin is kind of peaking to kind of help you fall asleep. And obviously there's a lot of other hormones as well, but you get the gist. And so that in itself now has been shown to be, within sleep, it's the most crucial component of health in general that we can get from sleep. 5 years ago, people would say, you've got to sleep 8 hours. If you don't sleep 8 hours, if you get less than 7, that's a disaster. Now they're saying, actually, it's worse you can sleep 8 hours, but if it's not inconsistent, that's worse than sleeping consistently for 6 hours. And so that's the first thing I want to state because of its importance. Then there are factors that interrupt people's sleep. And so obviously that's stress being one of the most significant ones. And that is dysregulation. And that's bidirectional. We don't sleep enough. If we aren't getting 6 hours or we're not sleeping consistently, we know that the ability for the frontal lobes to regulate your emotional parts of your brain, it's impaired, right? And so that then creates reactivity. Amygdala reactivity. And so your fear reactivity increases. Perception of the world changes. There was a beautiful study where they showed neutral faces to individuals, flashing them, and then got them to rate the scale of affect, how they felt. Did they feel unpleasant? Did they feel pleasant? Or did they feel neutral to their faces? After a night of sleep deprivation, it skewed massively towards I feel unpleasant and negative towards those neutral faces. Yeah. And so in the context of real life, I like to use, let's imagine you're at work and you've got a performance review come up, right? You slept well and you're feeling refreshed and you walk in there and your boss then starts inquiring some questions, maybe where you can improve. You're there and you're thinking, right, I like this. I can get some growth from this. Maybe you go in there after you've only had 4 hours sleep or 5 hours sleep. Now, when that person's digging into these questions, you take those questions as critiques and you react to them. You feel completely different. And so that's the nature of quality sleep. People might not even realize that that's the impact that it can have on the way they're interacting with the world.
Yeah, it's so interesting. It's that neat cheat code, isn't it, where he talks about like things that have resolved long ago come back up again when you're tired. You know, you can go into this whole new frame of thinking. So what is the main sort of tips you would say to somebody to look at if they're like experiencing very disjointed sleep? Could it be perhaps from snoring, stress, and obviously the realities of being a human with children and all of the things that we have? What, apart from like kind of maintaining or trying to maintain regular sleep times, would you suggest in terms of down regulation before bedtime, like the basic things you can look at to help yourself?
I think I've got to agree with what Andrew Huberman repeats over and over again. That light in the eyes in the morning is what sets it up. And so if you're fortunate to be in a country that has bright light like I am in Australia, getting out for a walk in the morning and getting that natural light in the eyes. If not, and you're in a perhaps over in the UK at the moment, it's not getting light until maybe 9 o'clock, maybe after you're already inside an artificial light at work, to get like a seasonal affective disorder light, so a SAD light. And so that's like this type of light that is trying to match and mirror what the light of the sunlight would be, and to use that regularly at the same time when you wake up in the morning. Light is so crucial for setting up these circadian rhythms. And so that's one that can help improve your circadian health. Then we move into sleep pressure. And so that is the buildup of that desire or need to go to sleep. So you could say that's your sleepiness feeling. And that comes through energy expenditure. And so movement is critical here. Yes, we can train in the gym for an hour, but then if the rest of the day is sedentary, your overall energy cost is still going to be lower. And we know that what creates sleep pressure is the breakdown of ATP and the universal energy molecule into its basic form of adenosine. When that builds up in the brain, that makes us feel groggy, it makes us feel tired, it makes us feel like we can't really focus, and so we want to go to bed. Caffeine is what disrupts that whole process. And so we want enough movement, and we want to make sure that we're not having too much stimulation around caffeine and stuff like that too late, with sleep pressure as well. Okay, so then that's another area. And then there's obviously the nervous system component. And so, we live in a world where there's so much sensory stimulus, there's so much external stimulus, there's so much noise, that a lot of people were in a state where their nervous system's not able to recalibrate back down to a restful state again. People try to sit still and they feel agitated, they feel nervous, they feel like they should be doing something, they feel like they should be productive. Well, that's just an elevated nervous system that's driving your behavior to keep moving because it's stuck there. And so then we need to build in conscious practices that teach the nervous system that it can be safe to come back down. And so that can be your breathing at night time. It can be your deep relaxation practices scattered throughout the week. It can be your environment and changing that environment so that it's dark at night and so that you've got some ambience that feels calm and relaxed and comfortable. And it can be spending time with loved ones and connecting with people that can make you feel safe. And so they're, like you could say, covering all three areas: circadian health, sleep pressure, and arousal management to consider improving sleep. Then we've got disorders, right? Yeah. And so sleep disorder breathing. So you've mentioned snoring a couple of times. If anyone that listens to this, if you're snoring and you feel tired, straight away go and get a sleep study. Just because sleep disorder breathing is the most common sleep disorder out there beyond stress-related insomnia. And snoring is one of the most common signs. Morning tiredness is a common sign. Dry throat is a common sign. Mental health issues are a common sign. Witnessed apnea from a bed partner is the biggest red flag because that means someone's observed it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And it's not something to take lightly. If you're a male or you're a female, a male might push it aside and go, I'm okay, I'm all right, I'm just a bit tired. No, that's going to end up in heart disease. It's going to end up in high blood pressure. It's going to end up in diabetes. Females might go, I know I snore, but I want to kind of push that away because that's a masculine thing and I feel a little bit shameful about that. And so females are massively underdiagnosed with sleep disorder breathing. And it's important that people know that because not a lot of GPs understand that. Not a lot of GPs understand a lot about the connections between sleep disorder breathing, blood pressure, diabetes, and all those sort of things as well. So I would say if you're getting your report back and it says mild to moderate, then there might be things you can do behaviorally with functional breathing, changing your rhythms and looking at just the way that you breathe and kind of building, as we'll move into in a moment, air hunger tolerance and nasal capacity. If it's moderate to severe, then getting on something like a CPAP machine, which can assist keeping the airways open, might be your fastest chance to revive your energy so that you can start moving and have motivation to kind of work to improve it in other ways.
Because I think that was one of the things that surprised me the most when I first started working with one-to-one clients, was the amount of people that were coming with that issue. And when you asked them the first question of, have you taken part in a sleep study, they were like, no. It wouldn't have even occurred to them to look at it in that level. And it is, of course, so important to really look at how...
I spent nearly 10 years in that space, and I would say that a good 70 to 75% of people who go for a sleep study, it's by their partner or by a loved one that's forcing them to go.
And like you said, it's so important because it's linked to so many things. And the reason that I love to share breathwork is for what I've experienced in terms of my health completely opening up again in every way. And then once you get your health back, then you're really, really open to expand everything. So let's kind of like dive a little bit more then into air hunger, breath hold training, and CO2. So one of the reasons, again, I started paying a lot more attention to what you were speaking about is when you started describing the language around CO2 tolerance, because that's when I really started to connect the dots and a lot of the things in my mind as well. So if you wouldn't mind just kind of speaking to, first of all, from a very, very basic level, what breath hold training can offer people, sort of through the lens of titration and the importance of taking your time and building really everything around fear. Because for me, working with breath has let me face fears, like huge fears, but it wasn't like overnight. It was like gently each day, working towards it. So speaking in how you can face mental blocks and the great way that you sort of describe all of the things that are happening physiologically that leans into.
Yeah, so typically, obviously, we talk about in our industry, CO2 tolerance as this thing that we can build so that we can breathe less, so that we can have higher CO2, that we can extract more oxygen per breath, and we can kind of get an advantage by being able to better manage and use oxygen. And I think that's true for people who do chronically hyperventilate, but not everyone does chronically hyperventilate. And it's drawn from Buteyko, who had a hypothesis that everyone was overbreathing. But we know that Buteyko wasn't quite right with everything that he was saying. The majority of the stuff that wasn't right. Practices work, but how they work is quite slightly different. And so that's going off the concept of kind of like these chemoreceptors, which are feedback systems that titrate our breathing to try and adjust our breathing to compensate for changes in CO2 and acid, and that they overshoot if we hold our breath, and therefore that's a sign that we might be overbreathing. But again, that's kind of been not really confirmed in the science. There's not really too much evidence that actually kind of picks up, but there are benefits from breath hold training. And a lot of people who get the benefits, or even people who do nasal breathing during exercise and adapt to nasal breathing in exercise, they often report feeling more calm. They often report feeling more regulated. They often feel like they can kind of go through life with a little bit less concern about stress, that you could call that a bit more resilient. And so I've spent a lot of time kind of diving into what I think is the adaptation that's occurring. And I think it's more behavioral and more emotional than it is kind of chemoreceptor changes. And so, we hold our breath. Yes, CO2 rises. I'm not saying that CO2 isn't a part of it. But then there is a point where we'll get that air hunger, that urge to breathe that comes through. Now, how fast you get that and how intense you get that isn't dependent on your chemoreceptors. It's dependent on how well your brain, or how much your brain amplifies signals through interoceptive predictions through to the parts of the brain that then make the information salient, i.e. important, and therefore in your conscious awareness. And so if we train that CO2 rises, right? And then, yes, a signal is sent from the chemoreceptors up to the brain. And there's a relay hub in the brain that decides, based off how critical that we are deviating from homeostasis, do we need to send information to the brain to change your behavior? And so air hunger is an affective sensation. So it's something that drives behavior, and that behavior is to make you breathe or to breathe faster. But if we then expose ourselves to the sensation, which in the brain is activating the same parts of the brain that anxiety would be also kind of associated with, or having a hypersensitive amygdala and hypersensitive insula, which is detecting the internal sensations. We know that individuals who have anxiety and people who have PTSD are not able to regulate that as well. And so then if we go into lean into an exposure, hold your breath, you lean into a sensation, you go into that space of feeling safe, you go into that space of a willingness of I've got this, and then you can learn to regulate that. You can then teach the brain to be able to, I guess, dampen down that signal a little bit. And so eventually, if we gradually, progressively titrate the intensity or the duration or the frequency in which someone does that very gradually, we're moving into interoceptive exposure. So we're moving into a behavioral psychological experiment, or not experiment, but what they would do in behavioral psychology of exposure therapy, yes, which is a desensitization process. So then we're desensitizing to a sensation that is practically the same as anxiety and fear. And so if we desensitized to that, then we would go into life feeling less sensitive to anxious experiences.
Yeah, it's really wonderful though, isn't it? It's like a little inoculation of what ails you, like you're working with it this little bit. And I see, and just to be clear, we're not speaking here about holding your breath for 2 minutes, yeah? You want to speak to a little bit about what kind of practices you're actually speaking about bringing in here.
Yeah, look, this morning I did a breath hold masterclass, and we were just initially just kind of doing 20, 30-second breath holds, like at a relaxed position. So at the end of an exhale, just observing when it starts to get a little bit more challenging. Then observing when it gets to the point where I no longer want to do this, then you recommence breathing again. And then you touch the edge of that, you regulate yourself, and then you just kind of progress with that. And then people might go from 25 to 30, 35 to 40 within the space of a session. Now, that's not your chemoreceptors all of a sudden dampening down, because that would be stupid, because then you wouldn't breathe well for the rest of the day. Yeah. And so it's just showing you how we can get this fast desensitization in the brain. And then over the space of weeks, months, we can kind of really learn to titrate that out gradually, right? And so like we can do it experiential, where we just have a number and just say, hey, look, I only want you to go to a 6 out of 10 in terms of the amount of distress that you have. Or you can go, right, this time you managed to get to this breath hold, or this time you managed to do this many steps with walking. Can you now get a little bit better? I speak to those two different things for me. One of them's building relationship. One of them's kind of just knuckling down and going hard for a breath hold. And they have different outcomes. And if you have to choose them wisely and how you do them for different people. But yeah, you don't need to be able to hold your breath for a long period of time to get this sort of stuff, to get the benefit from this sort of stuff. The process is the same with cold exposure.
Yeah, and it's
you get into something that feels challenging. You're learning to regulate in the challenge. You're learning that I've got this. You're changing your belief about the experience. And that might then shift to potentially allowing you in different situations to recognize a state of feeling uncomfortable and saying to yourself, I've got this.
Yeah, and speak to this a little bit, because obviously cold exposure, everybody is leaning into like the value of it. And for me, like I like to get into the water here. The water here is freezing. Like you don't need an ice bath. It's like cold enough as it is. But it's like it's dialing into what your body needs. So maybe you speak quite well to people understand that it's maybe not always the best idea to be doing it as like a religious way to hit a certain state of dependence on this. So I think you speak very well to this if you just introduce this idea.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a difference between the after feeling of doing breath hold training than there is doing cold exposure. Mm-hmm. And so that, like often when you do breath hold training, some people feel more stimulated. I feel actually more relaxed and more stable with it. And most people, when they do the ice bath, they tend to get the dopamine hit and they get the neuroadrenaline. So they get like the chemicals that create motivation. And so anything that creates motivation often gets conditioned to the thing that is being motivated. And so you can have someone who maybe they've got sleep apnea, maybe they're burnt out, maybe they have some form of fatigue issue because of chronic exposure to repeated intense stresses or just lifestyle. And they find the cold and go, oh, that gives me what I need. It gives me the energy and motivation to be able to get through my day. Well, that becomes potentially then with repeated exposure, a coping mechanism. You've just found another way to get caffeine and dopamine in the system, you know? And so it does create an opportunity where there is a state dependency. Now, I call it that. Other people might call it addiction.
Yeah, it's so interesting though, isn't it? Like that we don't always think about this. You're doing something that maybe just like this feels good, and then not thinking about what happens if that comes away. It feels good,
but also you're getting told that it's a wellness practice and that it's good for you. Yeah, and everyone says, oh, it's a hormetic stressor. But hormesis is about homeostasis. You know, it's about being able to return to baseline. But if you've got someone that goes in the ice bath and they actually afterwards, because they're so far down the stress continuum in terms of how long it's been happening for, and they don't return to baseline, we're just adding more fuel to the fire, but not the experience won't tell us so.
Yeah, I know. It's so
there's a mismatch between what it might do, right? And
it's this whole thing again around prediction, right? And the brain really, really loving to understand what's going on and knowing what's going on and what happens when it expects things to happen. So kind of leaning into this a little bit more then to speak about conscious connected breathwork, which I'm a facilitator of and a big fan of, but I also really, really appreciate the care that you have around protocols and who's doing this. So if we can speak a little into this now, because I know you value this practice very, very much and use it yourself. So speaking into, first of all, about the fear element here as well, because this is a real opportunity to work with your psyche on a level that most people don't have access to. So just speaking into your approach to this and your protocols, because very much one of the reasons I think you connect so many dots within the healthcare system, because there is such potential to help people with this practice, and with that then is required like a lot of safety and a lot of protocols, and you have those protocols. So speaking into this a little bit more.
Yeah, obviously. So conscious connected breathing and those that are alike, they're widely used at the moment for exploration purposes. Now, exploration of, I guess, people trying to connect to himself and to perhaps reveal opportunities to be more authentic with old beliefs and old patterns and old emotions that might have appeared in the past, to reveal those from the unconscious and to change the perception of those patterns and places and memories and emotions, and to then be able to integrate a new perception to be able to move forward. So, people always have barriers and hurdles in their life where they feel they can't do certain things because of a belief system they have, or an old memory that they have, or they were just called a sensitive person when they were a kid by their mother and their father, and that's just become their identity. And now they can't kind of get into relationships without feeling kind of too attached to them, and things like that. And so conscious connected breathing allows us to do that, but it is a breathing pattern that does disrupt homeostasis a lot. And so if we then have people who are already dysregulated, there's risk of further dysregulation depending on the intensity. We have to remember with all stressors that we've got to remember intensity, duration, frequency, and type or novelty. I say type because you can be novel to something, are all key areas that we need to understand when we're modulating stress. And so if anything's too intense for someone and someone doesn't have the capacity, then we can do more harm than good. And the problem that I see is that a lot of these practices are marketed towards people who don't have a lot of capacity. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they're there because they're vulnerable, and they're there because they're seeking change. They're maybe even seeking leadership and someone to look up to. And the nature is that these sort of practices, they do create a metacognitive state, which is a state of hypnosis, because of the way that our brain is always trying to predict. It's not often that people have sat for 20 minutes, 30 minutes doing cyclical breathing in their life. And so the brain says, well, this isn't something that's normal, but they can continue to do it. So it creates what we call a prediction error. And prediction errors are basically when the brain's surprised. And in those moments of surprise, the brain becomes malleable and adaptable to learn and update perception. Now, that can be updated into something that is meaningful if someone feels safe and they can explore it with a safe space and be observative, be with it. But if someone doesn't have capacity and all of a sudden now it's overwhelming them and they want to avoid it, they want to escape, and they're feeling like they just can't control those emotions, that can basically kind of create too much expansion in the nervous system in one go, mm-hmm. which can lead to re-traumatization. And I even go into the psychodynamic field of fracturing the ego. Mm-hmm. And so people come out with a fracturing of a sense of self and feeling like they're a bit scattered and all over the place and can't really make sense of what's happened. And they're now kind of in this dissociative state where they don't really they're lost with their identity. Yes. Or if it's worse, you have this person go into that space, but the leader is someone who is manipulative, or a leader is someone who just doesn't understand what they're dealing with. And that kind of happens and they can't hold that safe space. Or perhaps that person is just a charismatic individual who is just telling them what to do, and their identity then becomes transferred to then become like that person, or worship that person, or want to be around that person. And then we have people who can take advantage of that. And a business model becomes basically just keep coming back, which again is a dependency, not a healing modality.
Yes, and so explain that to people in a way that they can understand, because I think this is great information for people to understand, and again, the state dependence, because it is, and I will say again, I'm speaking to this as a powerful practice. This is why I want to talk about how do you then approach this from a place of safety when you have somebody who's maybe not realizing that they're, how you want to say, chasing, like they're coming in to a session because they're seeking to reach a state, but they're maybe not integrating it. So it is, of course, a very powerful practice, but only if you're integrating, and you're then taking, okay, what did come up for me there, and how am I bringing that into my life? So speak into this a little bit in a way that's digestible for people.
Yeah, it's similar to the ice bath in some aspects. When you really push the intensity and you kind of go for those cathartic kind of things where you see people kind of shaking uncontrollable emotions, but they've got no control over it. It's overwhelmed them. Mm-hmm. Now, that's not regulation. That's dissociation, and that's kind of fragmentation. But a result of that is often following, your body's going to release endorphins and dopamine and chemicals to try and make you feel good. Painkillers. Now, there's been an incident that's happened, like sometimes, you hear of these people who get seriously injured and they can't feel anything other than the positive sensations in their body because the brain's trying to say, we want you to cope. We want you to get through this. Mm-hmm. And so people then might get confused. They might have this like wild kind of fantasy, really dissociative state, go into a transpersonal domain and see spiritual things and stuff like that. And I'm not saying that's a problem, but I'm saying if someone doesn't have strength in their capacity of identity of who they are, now you might actually get someone who is, to feel like that, I have to go back to that. So rather than being able to integrate something that they've updated within themselves and then moving into the real world and changing their behavior, it's like, oh no, actually I need to go back to that breathing pattern because the sensation, the emotion, or the updating can become locked into the state itself. Mm-hmm. The biochemical state of low CO2, alkalotic state. Yeah, and the brain chemistry itself is states get locked into chemistry, into arousal and emotions, and that becomes integrated into that current state unless you take it into the real world when you're in homeostasis, yes. When you're in front and having interactions and actions and movements a big part of it as well. And then speaking as if you and moving towards the new belief that you have. That's the integration component that I see. Mm-hmm. I don't think talking about it's enough. I think that's the first step. Mm-hmm. But then it's the accountability of now I'm going to truly act in accordance with the way that I wish to believe that I want to live my life. Yes. Not have to go back to the breath pattern to feel as if I've got the motivation to do that again.
Yes, absolutely.
Because otherwise you just go in circles, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's like I require a resource of another person or a practice to give me inspiration just to think about being a better person rather than just going, I know that I can be a better person or I know that I can change my life and act in accordance with it.
Yes. And because I would see it as an authenticity practice when it's used correctly. Yeah, that's actually what it ends up, whether that was your intention going in or not, it ends up you coming to alignment with a truer expression of yourself. So speak then to some of the protocols that you have. If you were going to use it, I know you use it very carefully. So if you were going to use it with somebody, what is the approach that you take?
So do you mean protocols as in the way to do it, or do you mean kind of like
who's it suitable for? Yeah, like assessing, is it suitable for you?
Yeah. So first of all, the assessment for me is all around kind of the history of the person. Is if you've got all the contraindications. First of all, cardiac problems, history of stroke, controllable high blood pressure, recent kind of psychotic episodes, all that sort of stuff. But really, I'm also observing the person to see their openness in their personality. And if they're closed off, that to me typically means that their ego is defensive and it's kind of, it's not wide enough to receive more information. Our ego has a capacity of how much information it can receive from our unconscious. Yes. And so if you've got a person who is burnt out, that has fixed beliefs, that's kind of like in the same patterns of living, and they're not exploring new ways, to then have a flood of information that comes from their unconscious into their capacity of their conscious awareness, well, that could be overwhelming. And then you're destabilizing rather than trying to stabilize. Mm-hmm. And so that's some of the things I'll look at. But then physiological measures, I do believe that if we can kind of look at doing a 25-second breath hold like you would do with a Bolt score, but then look at how much distress does it cause you to hold your breath for 25 seconds on an exhale. That's a good indicator of how well your conscious awareness is able to receive information from the unconscious. If it's overwhelming and you're like, wow, that was really panicky, well, imagine then when your unconscious is sending more emotion through to your conscious awareness. Like that's the capacity. All right, that's I like to look at that and go, it might be a representation of our window of tolerance. Yeah. We can't hold our breath for 25 seconds without feeling panicky. Let's do work on that first to build capacity in physiology, which is a reflection of capacity in your nervous system and a reflection of capacity in your ability to hold information in your conscious awareness. So that's another thing I look at. And then HRV as well. I think that HRV, if it's rapidly declining, or it's just kind of like stuck really low and it's just flat, that is a good representation that your nervous system doesn't have the malleability and flexibility, which then is also going to be a representation of how well you can integrate and formate new memories and creativity.
Yes.
And so I'm not saying everyone has to do this, but as someone who likes to go into the depths of looking at how can we make things as efficient and appropriate and safe and optimized for the outcome, well, let's first of all get the person grounded.
Yes.
Second of all, let's improve their functional breathing capacity and their nervous system kind of capacity. And then let's get it so they're in a stable position so they can receive the information in a way that's going to be more integratable.
And I think this is beautiful. You see this very much within the community you've created in the School of Breath Science. It's like every facilitator wants more safety. Like that is like the main thing that you want to bring to anybody. And I think this is like really, really wonderful. Not just conscious connected breathwork, across the board when you're working with clients. So what do you think, given that you've come from obviously healthcare, like in a clinical setting, and the potential for breathwork? And I guess I'm asking this more around the field of like, how do people claim it on their insurance and all of the more pedantic parts of life that people should be able to access this? Yeah, because it's like you say, within the hospital setting, the doctor does not have time to to do what is required in order to bring this balance back. So do you see, or what is your vision? Do you even see it coming together like in this way, or what is your vision?
Well, that's a part of the mission of the School of Breath Science, to be honest with you. Having been someone who's been trained in the NHS and worked in a public space, and also have my own private consultancy, I want to share how much evidence we have out there to show that these things can work in the right people at the right time. And I want clinicians to understand this, and so that's why I do such in-depth lectures and put them out there for free, because I'm like, I want to see this integrated in the future into the clinical spaces, into the therapeutic spaces, beyond just being, a side project for people that are breathwork facilitators or just fully breath facilitators. I want it to be integrated into there. And I think that we will see that. It will take a while because we need the accumulation of the evidence. We're getting more and more research in this space.
Tremendous
like literally massively at the moment. It's really, really kind of on an uproar. That and psychedelic space, obviously transpersonal domains and the conscious domains are kind of coming back round again, particularly in England, here in Australia as well. And I want to be the person who is sharing that consistently so that we can try and get it in front of eyes. And so the School of Breath Science, whilst it's my private entity, the vision for it is to build it into an institute that can then hold academic workshops, can bring people in, we do talks, right? And make it so that we're integrating and moving this forward, raising the standard of the scientific understanding in our industry, but also outside of our industry as well. And so, like my training, yes, I take on breathwork facilitators. Yes, I take on breath coaches and stuff like that. But I'm really trying to now push towards those clinicians.
Yes.
So they can start to use that with their patients. And so I am getting physios, osteos, chiros, those fringe kind of now. But I would love to then start to see it, medical doctors, and nurses and that sort of stuff that's starting to understand it. And I am getting there. I just need to get the positioning right. Yeah. And so it's a long-term vision, 5-10 years, to really see that to come into fruition is a big driver of my motivation.
Brilliant. Because it's tremendous, the quality of the work that you put out. And I say that as in like, I have the same feeling when I listen to your lectures that I did back when I was in physiology, and I have to like listen to them like sometimes 2 or 3 times, and I'm like, now it clicks in. Yeah, it's so detailed and it links and it connects the dots. It really connects the dots. And I think that, and I'm sure it's the case when you already speak to osteopaths and physios and everybody, they see the much of the base problems with things, or the emotion that's locked in. And you shared a lovely story on your feed this week about sometimes the complexity within somebody is just a softness that's required, and just attention and your breath is actually what changes that. I see that in myself. If I feel tired and I feel the tension build here again around the lung, and then 1-2 sessions of breath work, I feel this, and I use breath work in the large term. I do a lot of different kinds of practices, but there's just so many different ways that it can aid people's lives. And so one of the things, I know it's so common for people with HRV, just because we were speaking on HRV in conscious connected breathwork, but obviously HRV is such a widely used metric, and a lot of people love their wearables. I'm not always the biggest fan of wearing anything on my arm or anything, but mostly everybody is like HRV and they're interpreting it. So you speak quite well, if you wouldn't mind sharing this with people now, just about the importance of context in the information. Like you always talk about physiology requires context, which of course it does, and so sometimes people get themselves more worked up by the metrics they're looking at because they don't understand them. So what would you say to somebody who's tracking their HRV and worried about the changes and different things like this, just so they understand baseline?
Yes. So first of all, a lot of the measures that we have on the things like Aura, Whoop and things like that, they're measuring a particular type of HRV, which is a reflection of your respiratory sinus arrhythmia. And so the intervals between your beats of your heartbeat when you're breathing in and breathing out. And so the biggest thing that has an impact is your breathing mechanics at the end of the day. And if you're breathing fast and shallow, it's going to be lower. If you're breathing slower and deep, it's going to be higher. And we can manipulate that in real time, and we can see that in real time. And so, that's then often in studies, they don't control for breathing. And then they go, right, oh, this is what's happening in the nervous system. So actually, these sort of things, unless you control for breathing, they're not the best indicator of what's actually happening in your nervous system. And so looking at something and going, that's there day by day, doesn't really mean a lot. You need to collect data, to filter the noise out. And that means 2, 3, 4 weeks of information, then reviewing that information and looking at what is my mean, what is my standard deviation and variance from that mean, and then when do I go outside of that? And when I do go outside of that, what's happening? Was I feeling tired? Was I feeling run down? Did I have a poor night's sleep? Had a night out with my friends and had a couple of beers? If that is, and that's your lowest point, well, now we know that's a good reflection of where your number would be when you're at your lowest point. What happens there in the peak? Oh, you had a day off because it was your birthday. You spent all day with your family. You're out in nature at the park eating your cake and having a good laugh. Like that, cool, right? That's your best. Now we know where we're working towards. And we also know what those numbers represent for you at that time. So the worst thing people can do is compare someone else's numbers to theirs, because that's just not how it works at all. That's the first mistake that people make. People always ask me, well, what's your HRV? It's irrelevant to what my HRV is to you. Yeah. But it's completely irrelevant. Because mine fluctuates between, say, 28 on a terrible day to 45 on a positive. But, one of my clients that I was speaking to, just his worst is 77. And so if we're like, oh, does that mean you're more your nervous system's better than mine in flexibility? No, because your 77 might be your lowest relative to your 90, which is your highest. And so that's where you need to look at it. Yeah. Now, if it's coming down, and that is in the context of overworked, feeling tired, underslept, well, you need to change. If it's coming up and that means you're feeling more recovered and you're feeling better, well, that's a good reflection. If it's stable and not too variable and you're feeling grounded, you're also probably okay.
So I think it just gives people that context on using the metric in a positive way. Not getting more stress by it. There's so many, and this is always the case. I have about an hour's worth of questions planned here for you, and it's not going to happen, So I've tried to have a little look to see what we could direction we can go. Because I wanted to talk just a little, because I know you did the lecture. I listened to it yesterday, the lecture on polyvagal theory, and we don't have time to get into like the total heaviness of it. But I think if you would share a little bit, and I think this is available. Is this available within your inner circle?
Yes, so I've actually made this available, so now it's in the free area.
Oh, great.
And so anyone can sign up. Yeah, anyone can sign up to the free area of the School of Breath Science. So you can join me for breath sessions and Q&A sessions around physiology and stuff. And there's also educational resources and stuff in there as well, onboarding things and contraindication booklets for people, as well as, resources like the two major lectures that I've done, the polyvagal theory and the fragile ego lecture about conscious connected breathing. They're available for everyone.
Brilliant. Because that was a tremendous lecture. Yeah. So I would say to anybody listening who didn't listen to this, it was a really, really, really valuable lecture. Okay, so the mastery section, that's what I wanted to speak to, because it is really, really great. So do you want to just talk a little bit about what you offer within
the mastery section is like a lower paid tier. There it works out probably like £30 or £35 a month to get access to all of the inner circle recordings, all the masterminds that I've done. I also run a monthly journal club where I break down the new science and application of a new journal that's relevant to our field. You also get case study discussions where if you have a client you're working with and you want me to support you, you can drop in for a 30-minute session and raise your hand and say, oh, I've got a question about my client, and I will then try to guide you as much as I can. And you've got access to all my breathwork recordings and all those educational recordings, which I think there's about 60 different workshops. Yeah. Some of them are very high lectures, some of them are short videos, other of them are live recorded workshops where I've actually gone and presented in a space. And so I thought that's just a great opportunity for people to go in and dive in and be able to get some CPD and get some understanding. There's a breath fundamentals kind of course in there as well. for people that want to get a taste of what the school's like, but not commit to, a full training. And so, that's available for anyone to join. And so that's like a bit of a taster, really, but also to be a part of a community that is all growing together, that has global practitioners all around the world.
Yeah, it's a great community, a great space. I don't always get as much time as I like try to dive in like a little tiny bit every day. And there's just always like, I could spend about 3 hours in there. There's so much information. So I do really recommend it. And I know you're launching there's a new program that you're launching.
Yes, it comes out tomorrow, actually.
Okay.
So all the details have been released today, and then the payment is the kind of like the offer is coming tomorrow. But this is like a breath resilience and structures training. So it's a sole purpose of helping the world to improve breath resilience. And it goes off a system that I've created called the 3R system: restoration, regulation, and resilience. And so there's 6 phases, and those phases are all broken into 2 parts that are focused on restoration, and that's looking at restoring homeostasis and natural breathing patterns in the nervous system, then restoring natural breathing, like mechanics of breathing. And that's kind of like looking at the restoration phase. And so that's to help people who are really stressed and overwhelmed to actually start to come down and kind of restore. Then we go into the movement of regulation, and start starting to introduce things like breath hold training and cold exposure gently to learn to manage a bit of stress and to learn to regulate. And then we move into kind of the resilience component, which is kind of more knuckling down with a bit more intensity, a bit more challenge with the breath holds, but also then using high intensity exercise to go up and then to learn to regulate in real world situations. And so it's a 3-part system where I'm doing all the education around the updated science on stress, on kind of like how the brain works and how the nervous system works, and then tying that to kind of breathing, air hunger, and this, what we've talked about previously about how that actually helps with regulation. And I believe, and it will be, a system that can be applied in a way where we can assess someone, where are they at? Do they need to be in restoration? Do they need to be in regulation, or can they go straight to resilience? And we can then apply that pattern to everyone. So really what I'm teaching, which lacks in our industry, is a structure to program things effectively in a way that is titrated, progressive, safe, but also gets outcomes. And so it's a proven network practice, a proven system that I've used over and over and over again. And I'm just basically, we're in the space of 10 weeks, 6 live sessions as a group, we get together and do that. And so it's very applied and it's very practical, and it's not nowhere near as in depth. It's not an academic professional training like the breath science certification.
Yeah. And they're all, I think that would be such a great program, because I know for me with time, I want to one day have time to do your full, like the fulls are, because it's just unbelievable level of detail. It's so wonderful. And just to touch on what I was saying there about the polyvagal, because I know there's a lot of facilitators that lecture would be very, very helpful for, because I think I was already not so tied in. I definitely would dip in and out of that language for sure, because it's so widely used in the space. But I wasn't so tied in that I was like, oh no, it's like been deeply challenged, because you've been speaking about it for some years, really, in terms of the way that you thought about it.
Yeah, I've been sharing the debate since 2015, I think, or reading it since 2015 at least.
And it's so, can you just speak to how it's, and again, it's what we've been talking about, how complex the system is, that it's like not one, of course we can't just like go, it's like this.
Yeah, so the main premises that are being debated, first of all, the polyvagal theory is founded on the fact that when people have higher HRV or higher RSA, they are in a ventral vagal state in a space of safety. But that's just not true. Like, there's so many factors that impact HRV. It's basically the physiologist Paul Grossman and the 37 other experts are saying that HRV is not the best proxy for vagal output. So for vagus nerve tone, which is what we've always believed it is. It's a correlative, but it's not a strong proxy. And so that's the first premise, is they're kind of saying, well, your foundation of your polyvagal theory is set on something that's not true. The second component is reducing states to 2 parts of the vagus nerve, dorsal and ventral. And so that they've just shown in the literature, actually, ventral vagal nerve can create stress, and dorsal vagal doesn't. There's no evidence that it leads to shutdown, and it can also be involved in calming people. And so, like, that's another component that's just kind of, I guess you could say, scientifically just not agreed upon yet. I weigh towards the physiologists versus polyvagal theory. And then the third premise is like the evolutionary component of Porges is saying that the dorsal vagal nerve is a ancient nerve, and the ventral vagal nerve is more of a mammalian nerve. Well, they've also shown that no, like reptiles and sharks and all of the fish have both as well. So that's also a myth. And then there's like semantics around references and citations and how he's used those citations in the literature. And so really, how much does it change? Well, it just basically you can't reduce states to nervous system components, vagus nerve components. We have a complex system from the brainstem to the midbrain to the salient networks to the frontal cortex that are circuitries. And those circuits can be activated from prior learned behavior, evolutionary, cultural differences, state-dependent learning, context-dependent learning. And it's all malleable and all predictable, and it can all change. Yes. And so you can't reduce that big system to say, oh, you're in a dorsal vagal state, so you're in shutdown. You're in a ventral vagal state, so you're in a social engaged state. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah, and I think what was lovely about the way you introduced the information yesterday was saying it doesn't actually change the work, though. This is it. It's updating your language. This is it. It's updating
that's the whole thing. Yeah. You can still look at people and figure out, okay, it looks like you're more in a state of shutdown. You're in a state of more of a higher arousal. You're in a safe space from the language that they're speaking and the behaviors that they're presenting. But you just can't now reduce that to the word of like, this is this in the polyvagal theory, because it's just like, that just doesn't make sense. However, the practices that you would still apply in the application of applying them to how you would in the polyvagal theory would still work. There's clear meta-analysis that when you apply slow breathing, meditation, social engagement, social connection, play, all those things, nature, quite clear that they help people, right? But they've been around for thousands of years. That's just part of who we were. It's not like polyvagal, Stephen Porges invented these, yeah? And so that's what I think really the scientists don't like it when people reduce things so simplistic that they skew so far from truth that they're inaccurate, but then a commercial gain then comes from labeling something in a certain way. Because scientists at heart are skeptical. That's what they have to be. And they also are kind of people who are trying to discover truth. Yes. And if things are being sold off non-truth, then that crosses an ethical barrier. And it does for me.
Yeah, and I think that's the interesting thing about naming anything, isn't it? Once you give something such a specific little box and name, then it becomes a problem. And
absolutely.
I think that's what's lovely within.
And that's why I've just gone School of Breath Science.
Yes.
Or just breath science.
It's not like one technique. Yes.
I'm not trying to create like a method or a technique or a brand name. Of course, School of Breath Science is a brand, but it's quite clear what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not trying to use the name to create an outcome from the name or relate it in any way.
Yeah, or do like a trademark.
I want to be able to adapt.
Yeah. 100%.
In 5 years' time, I want to look back and go, oh, actually, no, I've updated my belief on this and this and this. And that's what I was, I think a prime example of what I was doing with that lecture was showing how am I going to update myself now all this new information, this untendable paper has come out.
Yeah, and that's what it means to be a human, isn't it? It's the information is just constantly changing and observing your work. I love to, anytime something new comes up, you're very open to be like, here's what I think, and let's challenge it and let's have a conversation about it and let's move it on. Whereas you get like, and
it's scary for me, though.
Yeah, because it's like
it's scary.
It is.
When you're going against some of the people who have been in the industry or have a bigger name or a bigger brand than you, and you're like, I don't think I believe that from the science. So let me put it onto social media. Yeah. Geez, I get my heart starts racing. I'm thinking, God, like what? People are going to hate me, But I'm like, but I want to share this. I have to share this. I feel it's my. I'm not saying duty, but I feel I've positioned myself in that space where people are looking at me to go, Martin, what do you think of this? Because I get so many messages when people have like read something and they're like, oh, I've just read this. What do you think? I'm like, I'll have to make I'll do a Q&A in the School of Breath Science because I can't answer everyone individually. But no, I like people asking questions, but if I don't get back to people individual responses, it's usually because I'm like, there's probably a piece of content I can create from this for everyone.
Yeah, and absolutely sharing that. And I think it's so valuable to share your voice and your truth from what you know in that way without letting the whole, there's so many belief systems out there. And you just spoke to this. And again, I'd love to kind of like just chat before we finish here about this, about beliefs and the fact that we can change our beliefs and should. And I think on a global scale right now, everybody's beliefs are, not everybody's, but some people's are very much falling apart and being challenged to a level that they can't ignore. Yeah. So like how much working with your breath and your awareness really supports this? I think this would be kind of a nice place to.
Yeah. So I actually created a quote on this yesterday and I think I can probably read it to you. And so I put a little snippet together yesterday that perception is malleable. However you feel right now, that is not fixed and it can shift. Your nervous system is constantly updating its model of the world. And one of the most powerful ways to update that model is just through thought. It's not through thought, it's through movement. When you move with intention towards something that you value, you generate new sensory evidence, posture change, breathing changes, muscular tone changes, the signals that are coming in change. That's incoming data that trains the unconscious system that shapes your perception. In other words, move towards what you want to believe is possible, because action is not just expression, it's instruction.
Wow.
Right?
This is a beautiful
And so
quote.
to conclude that, to be the person you wish to be, you have to move towards that person, no matter how scary it is. You've got to go past the fear of whatever comes up.
Yes.
Because then you update your belief system, and your belief systems regulate your physiology, and your physiology is always priming your belief systems.
Yeah.
And so, yes, we can learn to regulate. And when we do learn to regulate, we now expose ourselves to the new belief system we wish to have. And then through the element of surprise, we update our beliefs.
And it is so simple. It's scary sometimes, to do it. That's the whole
it's
point.
So simple.
Yeah, so simple.
It is so simple. But at the same time, it's so fearful. Because there's a resistance to change. And one of the most scariest things out there is the unknown.
Yes.
But if you can sit on the edge of the unknown and continue to move forward towards something that you believe in, that is just the optimal level of growth. Yeah. I sometimes don't like our industry because we focus so much on taking people from unsafe to safe. I like to think of, how do we take people from unsafe to safe to thriving in life?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Because no one wants to just live just a safe life. People want to thrive.
Yeah.
There's an instinct to want that as well. I also want to try and bring that language in. We're not just here to help people heal. We're here to help people to really, truly thrive in their life.
Yes. Yes, and I love that you said this, because I think with online and the message constantly at the moment seems to be to people like, there's something wrong with you, there's something broken, and it's dialing into this all the time in the algorithm, and it is just what you said, like actually connecting into joy and being your most authentic self, and to do that is simple when you follow, and there is a process, and you follow that process, and then it happens. For me, then that's why I share this work. I wouldn't be happy and joyful now without learning all these things that I have, because I have no problem now using my voice. Yes, I still get scared. I get a little nervous before we were even talking today. It's not like a fear doesn't go away, but I have a little breath, and I know how to hold myself, and I know okay, you've done this. So, and it's like you said, the only way is through titration. It's through safety. It's through doing it. And sometimes you'll have this huge moment that feels like, oh, that was a big one, and you'll feel like you'll feel yourself pushing through a boundary, and then afterwards, in your nervous system, like, okay, that's it. It's actually it's as simple as that. It's giving yourself that support and knowing that it's you. You don't need it from somebody else. Like the teacher shows you the modality. It shows you like the process. But there's you're the person that's doing it. Oh, I could really go for another hour again. Like maybe I'll get to talk to you again. Just to finish, and I'm not saying this in a give me your favorite breath practice. I know you're very malleable in what you do, but I would like, what is your kind of most go-to if you want to center in, even if it's as simple as elongating your exhale, just to share with the audience, what is your like kind of most frequently used practice?
I would say for me, the foundational practice now that I get everyone to do to begin with is to see whether they can learn to engage with controlling the breathing and letting it go. Because a lot of people who are anxious and worried and concerned are telling people, are being told they need to learn to control their breathing and slow their breathing. That's kind of overriding a natural response. And we do have a self-regulating system, but most people who are panicky, anxious and stuff are already unconsciously controlling their breathing in a way anyway. And so this is Peter Litchfield taught me this sort of stuff. And it's like, can we learn just to become an observer of our breath and notice how it can self-regulate when it needs to without needing to take any action on it? And that's basically, I'm teaching in step 1 of this 3R system. It's like, how do we do that? Pendulating between external and internal, pendulating between breath and external, and seeing where we can just be an observer without having to attach to anything. Okay. And I've seen in a space of a session, no shit, people going from CO2 levels of 30, 25, back to normal from simply doing that.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? It's
one session.
Simple interoception.
You've learned to let go of all that attachment to needing to control your body, and you've allowed the natural self-regulating system to come through, and people then feel grounded after.
Excellent. Oh, I'm so excited just to continue to learn from you and continue to watch your work. I'll absolutely underneath put the links to your School of Breath Science, and if you don't already, follow
Thank
Martin.
you. I appreciate that.
Please do. And yeah, I'm excited just to see what you're going to bring into the world. What a great Dharma to be living.
Thank you very much, Anne-Marie.
Thank you so much for your time. Enjoy your evening. Take care.